paying attention. All right. Oh well. Yeah. Um. So, as a reminder, final paper is due a week from today. For those of you doing the final paper, um, I think everybody in here, at least in our in-person class, did the first paper. Um, so as long as you're happy with your test grades, you don't necessarily need to do the second one. If you need a test grade drop, though, make sure you do your second paper so that I can drop a test grade if you need a test grade dropped. Um, for you online students, same thing. If you did the first paper and you're happy with your test grades, you don't necessarily need to do the second paper. Um, if you didn't do a test or didn't do the first paper, you definitely want to get the second paper done because only one grade can be dropped. So, uh, just FYI. Um, make sure this is running. I did start it, didn't I? Okay, good. As long as I've done this, I still uh, can't quite keep track of whether I'm doing it or not. Okay, good. All right. So let's bring that up. Also, um, oops, I was meant to do that as well before we started. Do do do. Just as a reminder for us, um, the final is Friday the 25th, so not this coming Friday, but next Friday. Um, for those of you that are going to be here next week, um, if you're Hannah Pamplico and you're going to be on your spring break, um, that's fine. I'll also be here the 28th, that next Monday, so come in and take it then. If you can come in and take it on Friday, go ahead and do so. Get it over with so I can grade it over the weekend. Because I would prefer not to have a ton of papers, a ton of tests to grade the day before all the grades are due. So the sooner the better. Um, oh, and for my online students, blah, blah, blah. Review will be next week. I mean, review for all of y'all will be next Monday. Um, but also for my online students, I will probably go ahead and put the test up next Monday, just so you guys will have the full week to do it, like you always do. Um, but then once that week's up, that's it. I'm taking it down and I'm grading as quickly as possible because once again, I gotta have those grades in. So there will be no extensions on the final. So you get it done. That's it. um, Things are a little bit fast and loose with online stuff, but I can't be fast and loose with the final. That's you get it done or it's not done. Um, that's all I can think of. Oh, and I guess for you folks here in person, again, next Tuesday is not next Tuesday, the Tuesday after the what day is that? 22nd? Yeah. Um, that's movie day for those of you that can make it in and want to make it in. Again, it's optional. But to me, it's a real good review of Cold War stuff, and it's extra credit for those of you that want to do that. So you're welcome to come in and check it out if you want. If you're not, if you don't, that's fine too. Um, I consider them very good little movies, despite their age. They're I mean, they are amusing. They're not just like, oh, here's some education documentaries that you're gonna have to sit through. Like, Doctor Strangelove is a critically acclaimed film. It is darkly funny, um, and again, my favorite, Atomic Cafe. While it is just like film reels and propaganda pieces from the era, the way it's cut together is just so good. So, if you can make it in, please come in and hang out. If not, that's fine. Anyway, I think that's it. So we're probably going to finish the notes today. Oh, that was already up. And what I plan on doing is trying to just briefly go over the final two chapters with the amount of time we have left, just for the sake of getting through the notes, even though the last two chapters won't be on any test you have to worry about. So that's just how I am. Any questions before we start from any of y'all? Okie dokie. So, we ended with this. Changes in the entertainment industry. So, Hollywood. And, the new woman with changes in clothing and the flappers and all of that. Radio was a big thing, which we'll get into more next chapter, actually. This real weird picture that, again, if you come in for movie day, there's a sequence like this where it's like, oh, let's all dress up in our Sunday clothes, suit and tie, and these awful shoes. This sticks with me because I remember as a child, my sister, my younger sister is 3 years younger than me. My mother would try to get us ready to go to church, and it was specifically shoes like this that she tried to put my sister in. And my sister would cry and scream and fight, and sometimes my mom would just give up and be like, all right, we're not going to church today. Forget it. And that'd be it. It'd be because of these little dress shoes that she could not get on my squalling little sister. So, yeah, that's why that sticks out for me. And then, of course, let's see, radio, The Lost Generation, this generation between World War I and World War II. Well, World War I and the Depression specifically. Mostly Paris, and then Sigmund Freud, which, again, we're not going to go too much into, but important for psychology. I ended before we got to this, because there was too much to talk about in the, 5 minutes we had left. So, we mentioned the African-American migration to the north, congregation into certain regions, particularly Harlem. They challenged the social norms of the day. A group of black writers paid homage to what they called the New Negro, which is to say the second generation born after 1865. So not the children of former slaves, but the grandchildren. So they were two generations separate from slavery. So while their, say, grandparents were perhaps former slaves, they themselves were two generations removed from that. So they were typically better educated than their parents, and certainly their grandparents. They were more integrated into society, and following individuals like W.B. Du Bois, James Weldon Johnson, who was the chief executive of the NAACP, made this very important statement. The final measure of the greatness of all peoples is the amount and standard of the literature and art they produced. So, in other words, if the racists want to speak down on us and say how we are not contributing to society, well, let's prove them wrong. Let's produce art and literature. Let's make culture, essentially, because if you're not a civilization, you don't produce culture. Well, let's produce culture and prove them wrong, essentially. Writing, poetry, music flourished, jazz and the blues, rhythms meaning emotional freedom, expression of sexuality, which of course had lots of pearl clutchers, freaking out, but You know, you get that every generation. Um, this also resulted, well, not really the necessarily this movement, but at the same time, there was the Jamaican-born Marcus Messiah Garvey, who settled in Harlem and created the Universal Negro Improvement Association, or UNIA, in Jamaica 2 years before. He did not want equal access to the American dream. He wanted a Back to Africa movement to repatriate many of his people back to their homeland. Now, the issue with that is most of the black people in America had never been to Africa. I mean, we're talking about like the third generation born post-slavery, and I mean, most of the slaves in America in like 1865 were several generations post like the end of the transatlantic slave trade. So like they weren't even born in Africa. They were several generations past that. They had been born in America for generations at that point. I mean, Garvey wasn't even born in Africa. He was born in Jamaica. So there was a lot to that. He was quite militant in his actions. He decried the way the NAACP approached things. The book goes into a bit more detail. He tapped into the racial discontent of African Americans for whom living in the United States had proven so difficult, denounced what he saw as the accommodationist efforts of the NAACP, and declared, to be a Negro is no disgrace but an honor, and we of the UNIA do not want to become white. Indeed, he proclaimed black is beautiful and asserted that both God and Jesus were black, which, I mean, you know, Jesus was at least Middle Eastern, so we're halfway there. Ironically, the UNIA and D.C. Stevenson's Klan agreed on the necessity of racial segregation, though Garvey never accepted the premise that blacks were inferior, because, obviously. Still, though, he ended up being deported back to Jamaica after a mail fraud charge connected to his Black Star Line, which is what he used to move people back to Africa, and eventually there was a lot of fraud on it. Mail fraud being the same as sort of like wire fraud, which is to say money laundering. Anyway, so we have the NAACP headquarters. And more of the new generation there. Okay, this is some top members of the NAACP. I think I've got this. Here we go. This is a picture that would have freaked out a bunch of, early 20th century racists. Not only is it four well-dressed black women, but four well-dressed black women driving a car. Oh, no. I mean, that's too much. Can't have that. Then, of course, you got jazz and the blues. Got the Jazz Kings here. Here is Marcus Garvey. Now, this is a bit more toned down from what he usually wore. I've got a picture here, which is also in the book. This is his full regalia. The picture in the book has the caption, dressed in military regalia, topped with a plumed hat, Jamaican immigrant Marcus Garvey embodied the spirit of black nationalism after World War I. Mentions the UNIA, attracted a sizable following in the United States, the Caribbean, Central America, Canada, and Africa. Advocated for black political and economic independence. What's weird about the picture that I found compared to the picture that's in the book is, like, this specifically focuses on Garvey. But in the book, the guy in the back, he's in focus. Like, he's not a blur like this. I don't know what that's about. And you also see, I mean, you see more of the car, so the picture's more zoomed out in the book. I don't know what they did to this image to focus in and blur the guy out, but anyway. Point being, this is how he dressed. So when I say he was militant in how he did things, he was literally militant in how he did things. Like, he acted the part, acted and dressed the part. So, needless to say, with these, quote, traditional values coming under attack, there was quite a bit of backlash, especially when it came to white supremacy, because, well, we've already gone over some of that. Post-World War I, there was a new round of discrimination for immigrants, especially the large groups of Jewish and Catholic people trying to get out of Eastern Europe, especially in the newly created Soviet Union, which was not particularly kind to religious minorities. So the specific example that the book gives is the Sacco and Vanzetti case. There was a botched robbery in 1920 that left the bookkeeper and a guard dead. There were 2 Italian immigrants that were blamed for the crime. Though when they got to the trial, very little of the argument was about the evidence of what happened and how it pointed to these 2 guys, and more about where they were from and their ideology. They were anarchists, and they dodged the draft when it came to World War I, and that was the reason they were to blame. They had major support, or they had support from major lawyers, and as you're going to see here in a minute, support from all over the world, but they still ended up being sentenced to death by the electric chair in 1927, which again, if you folks show up for movie day, there's another similar event that happens in the Cold War. So yeah, we see a lot of repeats in history if you haven't caught on to that in the 2 semesters most of y'all have been here with me. There was also the National Origins Act, restricted immigration by any foreign group to 2% of its population in the U.S. in 1890, which was specifically targeting Southern and Eastern Europe, as this is when those groups started coming in larger numbers. This is what we talked about several chapters back, where there was that shift from Northern and Western Europe to Southern and Eastern Europe, and that's when, you know, the Americans started getting really racist about people coming from overseas, despite the fact that, like, it was really hard to be the normal kind of racist about it, because you're really white when you're coming from Southern and Eastern Europe. Like, that's literally Caucasia. But they actually passed a law about, like, you can only have a certain percentage of people coming from the countries from this specific year that just so happened to be a year before the percentages shifted to favor this region of Europe. So, yeah, weird that. So here we have a protest against Sacco and Vanzetti being, well, executed. It says here Trafalgar Square, so this is actually in Britain. These are people in Britain protesting the death of 2 Italian immigrants in America. So here they are, Niccolo Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti. Here we have the Industrial Worker magazine, Sacco Vanzetti to die, and there's this part of the article over here. Here's some of the startling evidence that Thayer and Governor Fuller says is not sufficient, which is to say evidence that would, I assume, presumably exonerate them, but the governor and I guess Thayer is the judge just refuse to look at because they've already decided that these guys are guilty regardless. Because, hey, they're not American citizens and they're draft dodgers and anarchists, so they're totally guilty. And here we have the immigration bill, and then also the Japanese ban, which was a later thing. America, land of opportunity, prosperity, freedom, but, you know, we've hit our immigrant quota, try next year. So here is what we were looking at, and again, we talked about this several chapters back, is back in between 1881 and 1890, it was more than 3/4 Northern and Western Europe, and then after 91, it shifted to more than half being from Southern and Eastern, and then, you know, as you can see here, basically the opposite, 75%. And then after 1924? Yeah. Between 1921 and 1930, that law passed, and so it quickly shifted in the other direction. Never quite went all the way back to this, but yeah, Southern and Eastern Europeans were heavily restricted in coming to America. Because, again, they were largely Catholics and Jews, and you can't have that. And then we have here a centerfold from Judge. We have riff-raff immigration, which is like, okay, sure. The high tide of immigration, a national menace, which is a danger to American ideas and institutions, because, you know, nothing's a bigger danger to the land of immigrants than immigration. But, yeah, you know, you wouldn't be able to tell that today listening to the news. So, yeah, the more things change, the more they stay the same, eh? Oh, by the way, things continue to get worse. The Klan's back. So, with nativism continuing to be a thing, the Klan saw a resurgence around 1915 with the former Methodist preacher W.J. Simmons, which is weird to say because, like, I was raised Methodist, and most Methodists are pretty chill. It's weird that a former Methodist preacher would end up being the one to revive the Klan, but whatever. So the Klan actually became, how did I put this last time? More diverse in its hatred. So, you know, initially the Klan is just, well, I mean, the Klan was originally ex-Confederate soldiers. So, you know, they're just anti-black, racist. Well, now they're adding Jews and Catholics to their list of targets. So they're just hating more people. It's great. And anyone who violated community morals. So, yeah, they were the Nazis before the Nazis. And that's not hyperbole. Yeah, that's not hyperbole. Because they have the same beliefs. They refounded at Stone Mountain near Atlanta, Georgia, which is still there, and there's still like a big old carving on the side of the mountain that's this big old Klan monument. They bowed to the twin symbols, the American flag and a burning cross, representing, quote, their fiery determination to stand up for Christian morality and against those they considered un-American. This caused membership to soar. By the mid-20s, the Klan had over 3 million men and women nationwide. Because, you know, nothing says Christian morality like torturing people to death for thinking wrong. Which, as we said, they were hostile towards more than just people that had melanin in their skin. This revitalization was due to the desire to reaffirm traditional values that were seen as being threatened by immigrants, which, I mean, the Klan had always been pretty anti-immigrant. They just had focused on African Americans before then. So they kept their old ways of using force and scare tactics, burning crosses in people's yards, beatings, kidnapping, murdering people, because, again, you know, they're the good guys, they feel like. They participated in electoral politics. They got a number of governors and state legislators elected. Some politicians actually became members of the Klan. Let's see. They saw the Klan as a source of votes, even if certain individuals didn't necessarily support the ideals, but they supported them enough to work with them to get the votes. So, like, they didn't disagree with them enough to have a moral backbone to go against the Klan. So, you know, we'll get into that in a little bit as well. So here is Simmons. There's a fellow teaching you how to tie a knot. That's nice of him. There's some folks having a barbecue. There's some folks marching down the street in D.C. What's fun about this one is they're not hiding their faces because they don't have to. Democracy and the Fiery Cross. See, now, here's one that's seeing the Klan as positive, where they're using the Holy Bible to defeat the papist, which is to say Catholicism, because, again, there's this weird view among a lot of Protestants that Catholics aren't Christian, but and there was, again, that weird view of, like, if a Catholic has any amount of power in the United States, then suddenly the U.S. will be under the control of the papacy, and yada, yada, yada. And there was this view that, well, I'll get to this in a minute. So here's another march in D.C., a much larger one, as you can see by the sheer numbers here. Although I do like how they've got the Connecticut branch, and there's like 6 guys. Because, I mean, for one, Connecticut's not a very big state. But also, there ain't a lot of, not a lot of Klan members in Connecticut. So here we go. Again, you've got Rome, which again is to say Catholicism, as like this weird ape creature, and they're using the ballot, which more specifically violence, to keep Catholics out of power. But they saw themselves as like essentially modern day crusaders. And a lot of people in the public did, because they were fighting for traditional values, which is to say, don't let anybody have power except for white people. Yeah. I mean, and again, that was what the Birth of a Nation movie was basically about, which Wilson, you know, showed and said was such a great thing. Yeah. And they are, of course, still around. Very much still around. There was a little bit of pushback against the Klan. We have Public Ledger here. Klansman causes a whip and bucket of tar labeled terrorism. Carries whip and tar, a bucket of tar labeled terrorism. So there was a little bit of pushback against them, but that was certainly not the norm across the board. which we will see coming in just a little bit. Also, less violently, we've got this pushback against the traditional values by the Protestants, because again, like, Catholics aren't real Christians, obviously Jews aren't Christians, and we've got a bunch of them coming to America, and that's scary. And also new ideas, because science, I guess. So around 1910, two wealthy churchgoers in Los Angeles funded a series of pamphlets called The Fundamentals. They insisted that the Bible be read literally. Within 10 years, the followers of this belief were known as fundamentalists and had the strongest hold in the Southeast or Bible Belt, where they felt their traditions were under attack. Now, being in the Bible Belt, I feel like if you told anyone who was a fundamentalist that their idea actually came from two rich people in Los Angeles, they would be pissed about that. But, you know, that's just based on my upbringing. One particular, very specific place this came to a head was with the Origin of Species from Charles Darwin. This drew particular scorn. They found it intolerable that someone would suggest that man descended from apes, which wasn't the argument. That actually Darwin maintained that humans and apes came from a common ancestor, and in fact humans are one of the great apes, not that they came from apes. This became such a problem that by 1925, Arkansas, Mississippi, Florida, Oklahoma, and Tennessee made it illegal to teach in public schools, quote, any theory that denies the story of the divine creation of man as taught in the Bible, which explains why, say, like, Mississippi is typically the 50th in terms of education. Town of Dayton, Tennessee tried to gain fame by stirring up the anti-evolution fervor, which the book goes into a bit more detail with this. What do we have here? Local business people and town boosters wanted to put their town on the map. Recruited John Scopes, general high school teacher and part-time football coach, because again, this is Tennessee, and the only high school teacher you're going to be able to find is also the football coach. He defied the law by lecturing from a biology textbook that presented Darwin's theory, et cetera, et cetera. ACLU wanted to challenge a restrictive state statute on grounds of free speech and academic freedom. So it resulted in this huge trial that, of course, had a bunch of newspapers come in. This brought Dayton a lot of fame, but of course a lot of it negative. Court convened, millions of people listened over the radio for the first trial ever broadcast. Reporters from all over the country descended on Dayton to keep their readers informed. Cynical journalists like H.L. Mencken ridiculed Dayton as its residents. And the book goes into a bit more detail about this, but Williams Jennings Bryan was there. He was the 3-time Democratic candidate who never quite won. He was part of the prosecution, believed that accepting scientific evolution would undermine the moral basis of politics and that communities should have the right to determine the children's school curriculum. There's also a Seventh-day Adventist minister. Darwin's theory breeds corruption, lust, immorality, greed, and such acts of criminal depravity as drug addiction, war, and atrocious acts of genocide, which sounds like what you'd find in the Ark Encounter. Presiding judge set the tone for the trial by beginning every session with a prayer, so he was totally non-biased. Ruled that scientists could not take the stand to defend evolution because he considered their testimony hearsay, given that they had not been present at the creation. Okay. Mayer called the willing Brian to stand as an expert on the Bible. Yeah, so not a lot actually got done. The jury only took 8 minutes to declare Scopes guilty. 2 weeks after the trial, Brian died in his sleep, still convinced his views had prevailed. Scopes' conviction was overturned by an appeals court. Yeah, anti-evolution law stayed in force until the 1970s. So, yeah, that was the thing. It was just a big mess. Which, I mean, you know, that's just in the public schools. I mean, I went to a private school, and let me tell you, I wasn't ready for science when I went to college. Point being, this is where all of that came from, was like the early 1900s. Is like, science can't have that. Which again, like considering the attacks on education literally from the top right now. Yeah, welcome back to the early 1900s, y'all. We have learned nothing. Except that whoever made this is actually using the Pied Piper correctly, unlike that World War I propaganda piece. So, good for them, I guess. Although it is amusing that, like, the Pied Piper is leading them down the path of education, which is a bad thing. So that's the thing. Which I guess disbelief in God and the Bible would certainly be a bad thing for the propagandists here. Because, I mean, obviously if it's opposite of Darwinian hypothesis of evolution, yeah. But still, like, it's funny seeing the path of education is a bad thing, considering that's been really important in, like, human society. Descent of the modernists, Christianity, Bible not infallible, man not made in God's image, no miracles, no virgin birth, no deity, no atonement, no resurrection, and agnosticism, and then atheism. And as you can see, as the person goes down, not only does it seem to be aging, but like he goes from having a Bible to a science book to like looks like a flask of some kind, like chemistry equipment. Now, I do have to say, this is good. Anti-Evolution League, The Conflict, Hell in the High School. That's good. That's good alliteration. I'll give them that. Hell in the High School. Will you give students the Word of God? Stop the procession, save our students, blind leaders of the blind. So you've got entrance to the words, giveth light, or education leads you off a cliff like a bunch of lemmings, I guess. True science never wears blinders, miracles can't happen, and then we have evidence for Christ's miracles. And I don't know what the science falsely so-called thing is. I guess that was something that was said in the court, but it doesn't make sense to me. That was also on like the Pied Piper's pants there. Science falsely so-called. I don't know what that means. That phrase doesn't mean anything to me. Anyway. We had the Scopes monkey trial, as it was called. Thou shalt not think, as the verdict. And here we have another article from The Onion. Scopes monkey trial raises troubling questions. Is science being taught in our schools? Should children be exposed to facts or reason and empirical evidence suitable school subjects? And then we have here, Scopes defended by super intelligent chimpanzee man from the future. This is from the original Planet of the Apes. Cornelius, a beast imbued with speech and learning. Yes, Cornelius from the original Planet of the Apes. And then we have William Jennings Bryan, who Cornelius would absolutely trounce. Cornelius was very smart. All right. So let's get into the politics of the day, as we're nearing the end of the of the 20s. So with these cultural clashes in the 1920s, the Democratic Party was divided. So the Republicans were pretty much in a consistent state of power, trying to reconcile traditional and modern America, well, again, allowed the Republicans to remain in power, but there was evidence that they would not be able to handle a major financial crisis, which we're going to see. Yeah. The election of 1924 showed that the Democratic Party was not unified enough to elect anybody. Some members supported prohibition and religious fundamentalism. Others opposed it. They weren't even able to condemn the KKK because many were either members of the Klan or were backed by the Klan. Oops. Eventually, John W. Davis won the nomination after a pretty close battle with Alfred Smith, but got absolutely whipped by Calvin Coolidge. In 1928, Alfred Smith ended up winning the nomination and squared off against Herbert Hoover, who, if you recall, Hoover had basically run pretty much every federal organization up to that point, and was one of the most popular men in the country at the time. So obviously everybody voted for him. They knew who this guy was. Al Smith got beat horrendously, and I actually have both electoral maps for these elections. There were a number of third-party candidates. There was a Progressive Party in 1924 that actually ended up pretty comfortably third place. Not electorally, but in terms of popular vote, they did okay. But they didn't last very long. America is, for better or worse, a two-party government. Other democracies like Britain and especially like, say, India, tend to have much larger, more diverse party systems where if they want to get anything done, they have to work together, create coalitions to make things happen, as opposed to two big bulwarks that completely disagree with each other. So yeah, that's a thing. Although, as far as the third parties, they did get some success at a local level. So, governors and state and local legislatures. So there were some, Progressive Party folks on that level. So that's what we'll talk about here. So this is 1924. This is, I already forgot their names. Davis, this was Davis and Coolidge. Actually, that one's in the book. Yeah, Coolidge got 15 million popular votes. Davis got 8 million. And the little yellow up here, actually, he managed to take Wisconsin. That is Robert M. La Follette. That is the Progressive Party. While he only got 13 electoral votes, he got 4.8, almost 5 million popular votes. That was a little more than half of the major Democratic Party's popular votes. So he did okay. It's still a third of what Coolidge got, the guy who won. But on the map, he looks like he got almost nothing. But he got half of what this guy got, and a third of what this guy got in terms of actual raw votes. So, not bad for a third-party candidate, I would personally say. So that's Coolidge, full dinner pail. That's what lunchboxes looked like back then. You could kill a man. It's just a big piece of metal what's the email for us? Oh, paper two. Ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba. This is the Hoover election. Notice how little blue there is on this one. Yeah, Hoover stomped Al Smith. I mean, a number of southern states went Republican, which I know is weird to say in modern day, but like, again, this was before the party switch. I mean, Virginia, Tennessee, North Carolina, that back in the previous election had gone, and I mean, obviously Texas and what's that, Oklahoma? Yeah. That had gone, well, and then obviously Florida, for Davis had just gone for Hoover. He didn't stand a chance. Massachusetts, weirdly enough, went to Al Smith, but it wasn't enough. Yeah, Hoover beat the Jesus out of Al Smith. Solid South goes back on Democrats. Yeah, it wasn't close. Republican candidate may have 444 votes, which is just insane. And then this happened. Let's see. October 29, 1929, the stock market prices crashed, or will become known as Black Tuesday. And this was a culmination of this entire chapter. Decade of wild spending, buying on margin, reckless speculation. Now, this didn't cause the Great Depression. This wasn't like, oh no, everything was fine until this suddenly happened that we totally didn't see coming. It had nothing to do with anything we've been doing for the last decade. It was just the starting gun for the Great Depression. This was the final straw in everything that had been building up to that point. The seeds of the Great Depression had been planted throughout the 1920s. It created a powerful but fragile economy. We've talked about multiple economic crashes throughout this semester. But before the economy, while it wasn't as powerful as it was in the 1920s, it was stable enough that when it slumped, it was able to pick itself back up. But with this, it had gotten really big, really fast, and when it came crashing down, there was nothing that could be done to pick it back up. But of course, as we also saw throughout this chapter, America is not the only country dealing with this. Europe never really had an economic boom. The interlocking system of banks, creditors, and loans across pretty much all of Europe, they all got pulled down as well. But the system's been in place with these high interest on loans, so people were not able to get out of debt at all. It was like a bottomless pit. In fact, one of the things, the only country that didn't suffer from the Great Depression was the Soviet Union, because it wasn't connected to any outside country. They were on their own. And they saw it as like, or at least not they saw it, their leaders made it out to be, oh, look how superior we are as a communist country because we didn't suffer in the Great Depression. We're just suffering normally because we're like starving our people. But like, because they weren't connected to the capitalist market, so when the capitalist markets failed, they were just like, okay, well, we're fine, I guess. So yeah, it was bad news. Billions lost, the stock market's crashing. Um, Quite a few people that lost everything um, and saw no way out ended it. This was a common sight on Wall Street where people just like leaping out of windows. Here we have a guy selling his car for $100. $100 to buy this car, must have cash, lost all in the stock market. This image I made sure to grab because it reminded me of how my grandfather did things and also why he did the way things he did. Did things the way that he did. So we've got a squirrel. Why didn't you save some money for the future when times were good? And the guy says that he did. Now squirrels obviously known for hiding acorns over the winter so that they can have food when there's no food to be had. Well, if you had money in the, I almost said food. If you had money in the bank, which is presumably safe, when the stock markets crashed, the bank shut down. Your money was gone. If you had $100, $1,000, $100,000 in the bank, you had no money now. The banks went away, and so did your money. And that was it. So my grandfather, who grew up in the Great Depression, never trusted banks. He kept his money in cash, wrapped up in tinfoil in the back of the freezer. is how he did things. He never trusted banks. Which, growing up in this time, I don't blame him. Which, as we'll see in the next chapter, they did fix that, but with the way regulations are going right now, I don't know if that's going to stay fixed. So we have, just towns telling guys without jobs, keep going, we can't take care of the ones here, because there were a lot of people just like roaming around looking for jobs. So, there was economic prosperity after the Great War, but it was certainly shaky. And obviously, when we look back from today, knowing what we know, you can see it in retrospect, but for people at the time, they had other stuff on their minds. Race, religion, evolution, social justice, people were obviously busy elsewhere. And really, only 2.5% of Americans own stock, but they were the ones at the top. They were the ones running the businesses. And again, the banks were the ones that were also in the stock markets, and they were using your money to put money in the stock markets. So when the stock markets crashed, all your money went away. So after the 1920s, Americans of all backgrounds had to work together to fight for their economic survival. And we just have like 15 minutes left. So I'm going to briefly start the next chapter, just to go ahead and start it. Now, when I say banks use your money in the stock markets, that's what they used to do. There are currently regulations in place to make sure they don't do that. I'm assuming that our federal government isn't going to make those regulations go away, but who knows? Considering all the regulations that are going away, they don't make any sense. But hey, what do I know? All right. Let me briefly pull up this next chapter just for funsies. Again, you guys don't need to worry about this chapter for the test. The last chapter and everything before that is going to be on the final. This is just so that those of you that come in for the movie day will have a little bit of background on how we got to where we got. So, Hoover wasn't ready for the Great Depression, despite the fact that he probably was the most ready person in America for the Great Depression. He had, done every federal job in America up to that point. Prosperity was at its peak in March of 1929. In his inaugural address, he stated, "We in America today are nearer the final triumph over poverty than ever before in the history of any land. The poorhouse is vanishing from among us." And then in October, it wasn't. He rejected absolute laissez-faire, but also wanted to make sure that the government's influence over the economy was light. Persuaded management and labor to work together, which helped out a little bit, but it took longer than they were expecting for the Depression to go away, so businesses backed out. State municipal funds basically went bankrupt. Like, whole cities ran out of money. Chicago and other cities, for example, stopped paying their teachers, which I think they never started paying their teachers again, feels like. Hoover pushed Congress to lower income taxes and allocating $423 million for federal public works projects, signed the Agricultural Marketing Act into law to raise agricultural prices to help farmers, which, like, all of this is good. All of this is in the direction that it needed to go. Now, again, we're looking at this, or at least I'm looking at this, knowing what FDR did later. This is all the stuff that FDR does later, but on a smaller scale. FDR just is like, hey, this stuff is good, we need to do it bigger. And that's what the New Deal was. And he just kept pushing it until it stuck. The problem with Hoover is he was trying to be careful with it, and he pulled back before it stuck. Anyway, here's the picture of Hoover with his dog, which is a great picture because it's very humanizing. It's better than the picture of Hoover with, like, the Tommy gun, where he looks like a goon. So yeah, picture of Hoover and his dog. That's good. Here's a not so good picture of Hoover. Prosperity is just around the corner, and you got the guy jumping out of the building. It's like, well, maybe not this corner. Here we are. This is the image that I was thinking about. You've got world's highest standard of living. There's no way like the American way. And you've got people standing in line for bread because, well, they don't have any money now. Highest standard of living. We're standing in line for bread like we were saying just a few years before. Oh, yeah, the Soviet Union, they're so poor, they're standing in line for bread. Ha, ha, ha. We'd never do that here. And now we are. Hoover says, economic depression cannot be cured by legislative action or executive pronouncement, which is true. You can't just say, hey, we don't have an economic depression anymore. But, like, you can do stuff to ease it. Hoover's Poor Tobacco Fund. Hoover, hard times are still hoovering over us. This is actually a picture from the book. Basically, people blaming Hoover for the Depression, which he didn't start it, but he certainly wasn't making it better. He was more concerned about a growing government deficit than the Depression. Retreated in 1932, raised income, estate, and corporate taxes on the wealthy, which slowed down investment and production. So businesses laid off a bunch of people. Halsey-Smoot Act raised tariffs to protect American farmers, which meant that other countries raised tariffs on American goods so that American farmers couldn't send their products abroad to make money. Which, is how tariffs work for people that don't know how tariffs work. Hoover did push Congress to create the Reconstruction Finance Corporation to supply loans to banks in danger of collapsing, financially strapped railroads, yada, 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 and create new investment jobs and get the economy moving. They got a budget of $1.5 billion. Unfortunately, their funds were spent very cautiously, and mainly aimed at institutions that could repay the loans, which ignored places that needed the money the most. Which again, like, I get it. I get why you wouldn't spend money on a place that probably wouldn't be able to pay it back as the government, but also they're the places that needed it the most. Hoover also refused any kind of personal handout, which is to say welfare for those suffering, only willing to invest in the economy as a whole, which we'll actually get into one of Roosevelt's officers who makes a comment about essentially that, but we'll get to that in a minute. So here's some folks from various states. Are we for or against the tariff? Hoover signed the tariff bill, yada, yada, yada. Millions for public construction. So this is, again, the idea of pouring money into the government, or not into the government, into the economy, is you're priming the pump. You probably have heard that. If you don't know how old pumps work, it's essentially a, where's my mouse? It's essentially a pipe that goes down into where the water reservoir is. But you can't just pump the water up without it having, well, something to pull itself up with. So you have to pour water in to get that column of water to attach to where the pump is, and then you can pump it up. It's called priming the pump. So, back in, like, literally the 1800s, you had to pour water into the pump to get water out of the pump. That's what priming the pump means. All right, a few more things before I let you guys go. Hoovervilles, which is to say people that were homeless, were basically making little shanty towns that were often called Hoovervilles, living under bridges in Portland, wrecked autos in Brooklyn, New York, abandoned coal furnaces in Pittsburgh. In Chicago, it mentions a fight breaking out among 50 men over scraps of food in the garbage outside of a restaurant. Not great. Rural areas, coal miners and their families were evicted in the dead of winter, so they were living in tents. In the Great Plains, this is where the Dust Bowl happened. Combination of droughts and poor human planning, which is to say wheat rather than grass and trees, so the dirt turned to sand, and then windstorms came through and turned it into these massive dust storms. Well, I'll get into that in a minute. Most of the folks stayed in the Midwest, but a fair percentage picked up and headed to California to try to escape. Obviously, the people living in California didn't care for the poverty-stricken migrants. They called them Okies, despite the fact that not all of them were from Oklahoma. And this plight of people pouring from the Midwest to escape these literal killer dust storms inspired John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath. So if you've ever read that, that's where that comes from. So just real quick, let me show you these images of the shanty towns, the Hoovervilles. Got quite a few images of Hoovervilles. Blech. I mean, it's, as I told my Tuesday Thursday class, it's very like just fallout shanty towns. Here are the dust storms of the Dust Bowl. And like, obviously they were massive. But the thing about dust storms is not just that they're big and scary, but they will kill you. If you get caught outside in a dust storm, it's literally getting sandblasted. It will peel the skin from your bones. It destroyed crops. It would kill animals. It buries your stuff. As you can see, I mean, it basically destroyed this car. Yeah, if you're trying to be a farmer out there and there's dust storms, your stuff's gone. If you're outside, you're dead. Now, there weren't a lot of reports of, like, the Dust Bowl killing a lot of people, but it was literally deadly if you were caught outside in the Dust Bowl. So there's some folks heading west. I think that's it. And there's Crypts of Wrath. All right. We'll get more into that, and I guess World War II on Wednesday, because that's all we have left before the review. So I'll see y'all Wednesday. And we're almost done.